The first thing I would say, shooting high def, is to make certain that you have a good camera, even if you have to spend a little more to buy or rent a camera. My advice would be to get a good one, because you're going to have the same actors, you're going to have the same crew, everything else doesn't change, but you will damage your film without a good camera. For instance, and here I get into something where my knowledge is there, but it's a little bit limited. For instance, going into high def, you have your choice between a progressive or, I'd be too close to the mic here. You have your choice between an interlace or a progressive. Now the interlace camera, which is less expensive, is not as good a camera and cannot be transferred to film very well. The 24p progressive is not interlaced. It's just what it says. It's a progressive series of lines. Gives you a clearer, sharper, better high definition picture, and gives you the opportunity to transfer very easily to film if you desire it at a later date. Now, even then, so if you say, if you have to use interlace, okay, it's not bad. It's better than the cameras a few years ago. But if you possibly can, go for the 24p. Now here, you even have a problem there. The Cinealtas, which I've been using, require certain transfers from the camera to what you're going to use in your editing equipment, which for me is, I've got both Avid and Final Cut Pro, which are sort of the two leading brands, but there are others as well, and then require a transfer coming out of it to Betamax, which gives you additional costs. What is happening now is, and this is very recent, the whole field is moving so fast, you're shooting on a hard drive. There are new cameras that have come out within the last year in which the hard drive is in the camera. You take that out of the camera and you put it straight into your editing machine. There is no transfer, no increased cost whatsoever. And even from that, from the hard drive in your editing machine, you can make copies. It's not the most efficient way, but you can make copies. And there are a few cameras coming out. My son, who has a post-production company and is starting to produce, he's just produced one film, I was talking to him about this, and he says, and I have to quote now, the younger generation, he says the movement to the hard drive in the camera is going to be the major movement in the next couple of years. And he says it is too early right now, unless you really have a picture that you've got to start right away, to buy, he would say, rent at this stage, a hard drive, high def camera. He says within the next 1 to 2 months, 2 or 3 new cameras of better quality working with the hard drive are coming out. That would be my major thoughts on high def. I think high def is the way motion pictures will be going, at least for a number of years. We're in a transition stage, clearly. I don't know what will happen afterwards, but I think this is going to be the standard for a while.
What do you think about distributors buying theaters and putting their own digital projectors in as an alternative to distribution?
A form of that is happening. The theaters want digital projection. The distributors want digital projection. The problem is it's very expensive, and the distributors are saying to the theaters, it's your theater, pay to put a new digital projection in. The theaters are saying the person who's going to gain most with digital projection are the distributors, because it's going to cut your cost of film, so you pay to put the digital projection in. And it's going back and forth, but what is happening is a number of theaters are putting in, financed in whatever way, putting in digital projections. It's small now, but it's growing. It's been there for the last year or two, but in such small numbers as not to be meaningful. It is beginning to be meaningful. So the producer doesn't have to do it, and the distributor doesn't really have to buy a theater. The distributor can work something out and maybe contribute to something just to put the projector in. The major studios are barred of, as I mentioned earlier, because of the consent decree of 1948 or 49, the majors are barred from owning their own theaters. However, this gives rise possibly to independents doing it, who may become the majors of the future, because they did not exist when the consent decree was signed. So by just the luck of the draw, they can buy as many theaters as they want. So you may see some independents banding together, or maybe one independent growing, just the way the majors grew in the late teens and 20s.
I got a question over here.
Yes.
When you look at the long tail of media, and the sales of the long tail are actually bigger than the sales of the short tail. When we look at the whole digitization of media, using HD cameras as opposed to film, what's going to happen in 40 years from now, or 50 years from now? Any ideas with the archiving thereof, when we're shooting in XHD, MPEG 1000 or whatever? What's going to happen to those films that are being produced now? How are we going to retrieve those through that whole process, the archiving of all that media?
Well, it's pretty tough to predict that far into the future, but I could hazard a prediction, and that is one of the great advantages of digital over film is that film degenerates over a period of time. Marty Scorsese, I know, is one of the leaders in the group for preservation of film, but it's an expensive and increasingly difficult process, particularly for a number of the older films that are just lost. The film has just been degenerated to such an extent it can't be used. The beauty of digital is that theoretically it remains forever. You just have your X's and O's or ones and zeros or whatever, so you have no image as such to degenerate. As long as you can see those ones and O's, you can reproduce the film forever, so there will be no problem, at least for 40 years and probably for 100 years, in losing the quality of that. That's one I didn't mention that, but what you just brought up is a very, very good point. It's one of the great advantages of digital.